ألا من كنت مولاه فهذا علي مولاه، اللهم وال من والاه وعاد من عاداه.
For many centuries, Shi'as have been stereotyped as worshippers of stones and graves. They have also been attacked for believing in the imamate of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Join Rebecca Masterton in a series as she explores and sheds some light on the major misconceptions surrounding various topics in the Shia school of thought.
We can look at the issue of Muawiyah, again another controversial figure in Islamic history, and there's often a misunderstanding as to why the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam see him as an enemy of Islam. Some people who see him as a companion might have the idea that the word enemy is too strong, very insulting. But we can analyze the actions of Muawiyah and the intentions of Muawiyah in both Sunni and Shi'i historical sources. The very early Sunni historians were not shy to put down the facts as they had been transmitted to them. Admittedly, there might have been some bias, for example, by Baladhuri, who was a historian for the Bani Abbas, because they came after Bani Umayyah and wanted to make themselves look better than Bani Umayyah. So there might be a possibility that Baladhuri, from whose sources we will be talking, might have had also some bias against Muawiyah. But the facts collected together reveal a man who was very cunning, absolutely determined to rule the Muslim world, and absolutely determined to overthrow Bani Hashim. In the Sunni sources, it is said that Muawiyah was one of the writers of the Holy Quran, and therefore we cannot think anything but good of him because he wrote down the Holy Quran. In fact, when we look at Islamic history, according to all sources, Muawiyah was a taliq. He was one of those who outwardly submitted to Islam when the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family entered Mecca and conquered Mecca. Abu Sufyan made a show of converting to Islam, and Muawiyah, and on that basis the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family allowed them to live their lives. But Muawiyah was determined to get back what he saw had been lost from his family and what he saw had been a humiliation of his clan. We can see again, looking at some of the Sunni sources such as Sahih Muslim in volume 2, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family's idea of the character of Muawiyah. We have an example here where a lady called Fatima bint Qais, she came to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, asking for advice from him about who she should marry. She had had a proposal from Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and another person called Abu Jahm. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family advised her as follows. He told her not to marry Muawiyah because Muawiyah is stingy and tight-fisted. And Abu Jahm beats his women. And so the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family recommended that she marry someone else who was of a better nature. So here we have the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family himself describing Muawiyah having a characteristic which is the opposite of the characteristics recommended in a Muslim, and definitely the characteristics that are recommended in a Muslim leader. Another issue that is often said by the scholars from other schools of thought, the Sunni schools of thought, not all of them, because opinion is different between different Sunni schools of thought, but there are some that say that although Imam Ali alayhi salam in the Battle of Siffin and in the whole issue of contention between Imam Ali alayhi salam and Muawiyah, Imam Ali was in the right. They accept that Imam Ali was in the right, but that the issue with Muawiyah was that it was a mistake in ijtihad. That Muawiyah attacking Imam Ali was a mistake he had done in ijtihad. First of all, again, looking at this historically, at that time, ijtihad had not yet been developed as a science in Islam. And secondly, when we study closely the sources of Tabari and Baladhuri, who were both Sunni historians, we can see that Muawiyah was very determined to have Imam Ali alayhi salam assassinated, because Imam Ali alayhi salam was not going to accept Muawiyah as the governor of Syria. Muawiyah had been made governor of Syria under Uthman, and when he saw that Imam Ali alayhi salam was about to come to power, he found some pretexts for entering into this battle with Imam Ali. We can see it was not an error of ijtihad. It was a matter of deliberate planning. According to the sources, including the Sunni sources, it was Aisha, Talha and Zubair who were among those who had called for the assassination of Uthman. There are historical records that say how Aisha sent out letters to those who were already disgruntled with the rule of Uthman. And they were headed in the name of the mother of the believers, or the mothers of the believers. And it was understood that it is Aisha sending out the letters, calling for the overthrow of Uthman because he had cut her yearly stipend, he had cut her yearly allowance, and she was insulted by this. So she was among those who had called for his assassination. There was also unrest in Egypt, where people felt that the ruler he had put in power was very brutal and very unjust. So she was among those who had turned a blind eye when Uthman was finally assassinated. In fact, when he was trapped in his house, about to be killed, instigated by Marwan ibn Hakam, one of the Bani Umayyah, and others, she went for Umrah. So she left and allowed Uthman to meet his end. So it was quite well known who had been involved in the assassination of Uthman. But as it happened, when the balance of power went over to the side of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he in fact reluctantly accepted to be the caliph, Muawiyah used the issue of Uthman to draw up power, to draw up support against Imam Ali to try to get him killed. He called for revenge against the killers of Uthman. And ironically, those who had been involved in the assassination of Uthman went over to the side of Muawiyah, and they joined forces together against Imam Ali alayhi salam, saying that Imam Ali had been implicated in Uthman's assassination. That even if he hadn't killed Uthman directly with his own hand, he had kept silent when Uthman was about to be killed. And so Muawiyah never deviated from this line of calling Imam Ali alayhi salam the virtual killer of Uthman, and he utilized this to the maximum in order to get power and support from all the regions of the Muslim world. he used this to drum up the support for the Battle of Siffin. In fact, Imam Ali alayhi salam had made it clear that he was not going to have Muawiyah as the governor of Syria. This was the first thing that he made clear when he became caliph. And he asked for Muawiyah to give his allegiance. According to some political theories in Islam, if someone comes to power, and this is in the Sunni sources, then in order to prevent fitna, the people should give their allegiance. This is what happened with Abu Bakr, where some of those did not want to give allegiance to him, and so he fought them as apostates. When it came for time for Imam Ali alayhi salam to become caliph, Muawiyah refused to give his allegiance, and he refused to give up his position as governor of Syria. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam was left with no option but to try to gain support from his followers to fight Muawiyah. Now, considering whether this, again, the point of the mistake of ijtihad, even after the Battle of Siffin, which had left the Muslim community again in disarray because of a false arbitration during which Muawiyah had effectively been declared as being in the right through his trickery. Even after that, when the Battle of Siffin was over, he still maintained his attacks on Imam Ali's followers. He maintained his attacks on the followers of Imam Ali alayhi salam who were ordinary families living in Iraq, and he engaged in assassinations of families who were living in Iraq as well. When we look at Muawiyah's policy after the Battle of Siffin, we can see that he was anything but apologetic for his attack on Imam Ali alayhi salam. He sent an envoy down to Arabia to try to get people to pledge their allegiance through terror. And this is in the sources of the Shi'i historian Thaqafi, who's written on this in detail. The man he sent down to Arabia was known by the name of Busr. First of all, he entered Medina. When he entered Medina, he threatened to massacre all the Ansar. They were terrorized. Some of them fled and some of them handed over their allegiance to Muawiyah to save their lives. He then went to an area where the clan of Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari lived. Now Jabir had gone into hiding because he was a known follower of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Busr threatened his clan with collective punishment if they were not going to hand Jabir over. But in fact, they didn't hand him over. And Busr left in his place someone who could rule, known by the name of Abu Huraira. After terrorizing the residents of Medina, he then decided to go down to Mecca, where he murdered several of the descendants of Abu Lahab, and he made it clear to Quraysh that their enjoyment of power was over. He then moved on down to Yemen. He went to a place called Hamdan, where there were nobles and families living. And at first they tried to resist him, but he had several armies, but he had with him several groups with him who were fighting on his side. When he entered Hamdan, they killed the men of that town and they enslaved the women. And these were known as the first Muslim women to be enslaved in the history of Islam. And then after that, he went to Hadramaut. He stood outside a castle wherein there lived a leader known by the name of Abdullah ibn Thawaba. And he called him down because he said he wanted to speak to him. Abdullah ibn Thawaba went down to speak to Busr. He said, "What is it you want of me?" and Busr ordered his men to kill him. Ibn Thawaba said, "You want to kill me?" Busr said, "Yes." And they beheaded him then and there. It is clear from the fact that Muawiyah appointed someone such as Busr, who he knew would bring allegiance to him through the means of terror and threats and violence and assassinations. We can see from this policy what Muawiyah intended in his rule as caliph. And it was only after this that the Shias of Imam Ali realized that they should gather their powers behind him to fight Muawiyah in battle. But by that time it was too late, because Imam Ali was